The night Mara Voss understood what she was standing in her father's study on the 43rd floor of Voss Tower with blood on her lip and a decision already forming behind her teeth. She had not cried. She had not begged. She had done what she had been trained to do since childhood, which was to hold very still and let the silence absorb whatever had just happened and present to the world a face that gave nothing away. The fire in the hearth snapped once. The city spread itself across the windows in 40 years of light and glass. And Conrad Voss turned back to his desk as though the distance between raising his hand and lowering it again was simply the natural arc of a man finishing a point. He straightened his left cuff, then his right. The gesture was unhurried and precise, and it told her everything she had spent 27 years refusing to understand. This was not the first time he had done this. It was only the first time he had done it to her. She pressed her fingers to her lip and looked at the blood on her fingertips and felt something go very quiet and very cold behind her sternum. Not rage, not grief, something more fundamental than either. The particular stillness of a door swinging shut on a furnace and the heat finding nowhere left to go. Conrad Voss was 61 years old, and he looked every year of it tonight. The lines in his face ran deep. His collar was open in a way she had never seen in a business context. The tie loosened the bourbon glass already at its fourth refill. There was a tremor in his right hand she had never noticed before, and she watched it with a cold clinical interest that surprised her. He was afraid of something. That alone had been enough to tighten her stomach when she walked in. Her father did not do afraid. He did controlled, and he did calculated, and he did the kind of certainty that made rooms rearrange themselves around him. Fear was not in his vocabulary, and yet there it was in the tremor of the hand that had just hit her, and she noted it precisely and without judgment, because you never knew when a thing would matter. He had asked her to sit. He had poured himself bourbon without offering her any. He had looked out at the Chicago skyline for a long time before he spoke at the rain dragging itself across the glass, at the city he had spent 4 decades building his name into. The Voss Group is in trouble, he said. He said it the way he said everything factual and brisk, with the implication that facts were conditions to be managed rather than realities to be felt. The overseas freight contracts fell through 6 months ago. He had been covering losses through consolidated positions. The positions were gone. Crown Dynamics had offered to absorb the group's liabilities. Full acquisition. They would keep the name, keep the board, keep the buildings. There are conditions, he said. She had already known in the way that bodies understand danger before minds catch up. She had already known before he said the name. Harlan Beckett, she repeated carefully, is 54 years old. He is a serious man. He has been investigated by the SEC twice. There are women who will not attend his private events anymore, and everyone in this city knows why. Everyone in this city knows what I choose to tell them. Conrad set down his glass. His voice went flat and precise, the boardroom voice, the voice with no room in it for anything except conclusion. This is not a discussion, Mara. The paperwork is drafted. The announcement is scheduled for end of month. She stood up slowly. She smoothed the front of her dress with both hands and looked at her father the way she had been teaching herself to look at him for years without the child still living inside her, making her flinch. You need to tell me you are joking, she said. I never joke about money. This is not about money. You are talking about selling me to a man I have been afraid of since I was 23. You are telling me my life is a financial instrument. I am telling you this family needs. I do not care what this family needs. The words came out harder than she meant, and she did not take them back. I am not doing this. I am not marrying Harlan Beckett. You can restructure. You can file Chapter 11. You can burn the whole company to the ground for all I care, but you are not selling me. The room went quiet in a way that rooms do not go quiet on their own. Conrad crossed the distance between them in 4 steps. He was a big man, still broad through the shoulders, thick-necked, the body of someone who had worked with his hands before the money arrived. And when he raised his right hand, she did not move back because some stupid childish part of her still believed he would not. He did. The blow caught her across the left cheek and jaw, and open-palmed, but with enough force that her head snapped sideways, and she tasted copper immediately. A warm, bright burst of it against her inner lip where the teeth had cut. She stumbled into the chair arm and caught herself and stood with one hand pressed flat against the bookshelf and the other touching her face with a kind of dazed curiosity, like she was checking whether her face was still where she had left it. Conrad straightened his left cuff, then his right. "You were born to protect this family," he said. His voice did not waver. It was the same voice. "Everything you have, everything you are came from this name. You will do what is required of you." Mara looked at her hand. There was blood on her fingertips. She did not cry. She had learned not to cry in this room by the time she was 10. She looked at the blood and felt the furnace door swing shut and the cold settle in behind it, and said one word. "All right." He nodded, once satisfied in the way men like him were satisfied by surrender. He was already turning back toward his desk when she left the room. She walked down the corridor at a normal pace, past the portraits of 4 generations of Voss men who all had the same broad foreheads and the same flat eyes, past the assistant's empty desk, past the room that had been Eli's before Eli was gone. She pushed through the door to the executive bathroom at the end of the hall, ran the cold tap and held both hands under the water until the bleeding on her lips slowed. She looked at herself in the mirror for a long time. Then she went back down the corridor, not toward the elevator, toward her father's private office, the one adjacent to the study, the one he kept locked. She had watched him punch in the access code 100 times over the past 3 years, and she had held on to each digit like a stone in her pocket, not knowing why. Maybe knowing why, the lock accepted the code on the first attempt. The office was dark. She did not turn on the lights. She crossed to the desk by the glow of the city outside and opened the bottom left drawer and found what she was looking for in under a minute. Not because she had planned this entirely, but because she had always known somewhere underneath the obedience that there would come a moment when knowing things would matter more than performing the role. The flash drive was black and small and unmarked. She had seen him transfer files to it twice in the past year, and each time he had looked at it with that private proprietary satisfaction that meant it held something worth protecting. She pocketed it. She took the service elevator down 43 floors. She walked through the parking structure without stopping. She came out on Wabash Avenue into the full force of the November rain and stood on the sidewalk in a silk dress worth more than most people's rent, and looked up at the building her family had put its name on and felt nothing for it except the beginning of a long and irrevocable severance. She did not have a coat. She did not have a phone. She had left it on the study table, some instinct she did not question telling her that a phone could be tracked. She had a flash drive and a split lip and $40 in the hidden pocket of her dress, which she had started carrying 2 years ago because old habits from her mother's warnings died hard. She started walking. The rain was brutal. She was soaked through within 2 blocks, the silk dress pasted to her skin, her heels clicking against wet concrete. She did not know where she was going in any specific sense, but her body was moving south and east, toward the lake, away from the towers and the money and the cameras that watched the Voss Group's addresses 17 hours a day. She thought about Eli. She stopped thinking about Eli. Chicago in November had no patience for anything soft. The city had been eating softness for 100 years. The rain came sideways off Lake Michigan, cold and relentless, the kind that did not fall so much as a tack, driving into glass and steel, and the upturned collars of men who stood outside smoking cigarettes they could not finish. She was the only person walking at this hour on this block, and the street felt like something from which everything human had been recently evacuated. The docks came up through the rain in the dark around 11, the industrial waterfront south of the tourist corridor, warehouses and shipping containers, and the smell of diesel and rust, and the lake working itself into a fury out past the breakwater. She had come here once as a teenager chasing some idea of freedom, and her father had found her within 3 hours. She had thought then that nowhere was far enough. She was older now, and she was not sure that had changed. She heard the vehicles first. 3 black SUVs moving without headlights through the service road that ran between the warehouses, the sound of tires through standing water. She pressed herself into the shadow of a container stack as they passed and watched through the gap between metal walls as they came to a stop on the open dock apron ahead. Men got out, 8, maybe 10, moving with the coordinated quiet of people who were very practiced at being somewhere without officially being there. Dark coats, no conversation. They spread into positions along the dock in a way that had geometry to it, a shape that had been rehearsed. Someone was already kneeling on the dock, a figure in dark clothing, hands behind his back, the posture of someone who had been in this position before and knew better than to beg. The rain hammered down on him without mercy. A man stepped forward from the group and stood before the kneeling figure. Even at this distance, even through the rain and the dark, there was something about him that pulled focus. Not his size. He was not especially large. Something else. A stillness. The quality of a man who never moved unless the movement was deliberate, who never said a word that was not already finished in his head. He stood with his hands in his coat pockets and looked down at the kneeling man the way you might look at a problem you had already solved. He said something. She could not hear it over the rain. The kneeling man answered. His voice broke at the end of whatever he said. The still man tilted his head slightly to the left. That was all. Just that small, precise movement. And somewhere to his left, another man raised a weapon. Mara's heel caught a strip of gravel between the concrete sections, and she went down hard. Not all the way, caught herself with both palms against the wet ground, but the sound was impossible to miss. A crack of impact against the dock that cut through even the rain. Every head turned. She stood up straight. She could not have said why. Some stupid animal refusal to be found crouching. She stood up straight with blood on her palms and her dress plastered to her body and faced 8 gun barrels across 30 feet of rain-soaked dock, and the only thought in her head was that this was a remarkably stupid way to die. The still man had turned with the rest of them. He looked at her from across the distance with an expression that was very difficult to read in the dark. Not surprise exactly, not irritation, something that might have been either. The weapon stayed up. Nobody spoke for what felt like a long time, but was probably less than 5 seconds. Then the still man said calmly and with complete authority, "Lower the guns." Nobody argued with him. The weapons came down with practiced synchronization. He walked toward her. His men parted to let him through and did not follow. He stopped 10 feet away and looked at her with the same analytical attention he had been giving the kneeling man, as if she were another problem that needed categorizing. She was aware of how she looked. She made herself hold his gaze anyway. He was younger than she had expected from the stillness. Early 30s, dark-haired, with the kind of face that must have been remarkable before whatever had happened to it that made it into a mask. There was a scar along his left jaw, barely visible in the rain. He was dressed better than anyone had a right to be in weather like this, and he seemed unmoved by the rain, in the way that some men were unmoved by physical discomfort. Not stoic, just somewhere else entirely. "You have blood on your face," he said. Not a question, an observation delivered without affect, the way you would observe a fact about weather. "I am aware," she said. His eyes moved to her hands, still half raised from catching herself. She lowered them. His gaze went to the dark road behind her, checking for pursuit, then came back to her face. "Who are you running from?" he said. "That is not your concern. You are on my dock." She looked around at the dock, at his men, at the man still kneeling 20 feet away who had not moved. "I did not know it was yours. Everything between the river and the breakwater is mine." He said it without pride. "Just another fact. You came from the north on foot in silk in November." His head tilted slightly again. That same small movement she had seen from across the dock. "So I will ask again. Conrad Voss," she said. She did not know why she said it. Maybe because she was tired and wet, and her lip was bleeding, and she had $40 and a flash drive, and nothing else. And the man in front of her already knew she had watched something she was not supposed to watch. And lying seemed like the most exhausting possible choice. "Conrad Voss," she repeated. "I am running from Conrad Voss." Something changed in his face. Not much. A slight adjustment around the eyes. If she had blinked, she would have missed it. "His daughter," he said. It was not a question either. "How do you know that?" "I know every significant face in this city." He looked at her for another moment, precise in assessing. "Come with me. I do not know who you are." Stellan Greer. He turned back toward the vehicles without waiting to see if she would follow. "And you do not have anywhere else to go." He was right. That was the worst part. She stood in the rain on a dead man's dock with a flash drive full of secrets she did not yet understand, bleeding from a wound her own father had given her, and she followed the most feared criminal in Chicago because the alternative was standing in the rain until something worse found her. His men moved back toward the SUVs. The kneeling man on the dock remained kneeling. She did not look at him as she passed. She looked straight ahead and kept her breathing even, and told herself she would figure out the rest later, that later existed, that she would be in a condition to make decisions by the time later arrived. One of Stellan's men opened the rear door of the center vehicle. She got in. Stellan got in the other side. He did not speak during the drive. He looked out the window with his hands folded in his lap and let the silence sit between them without filling it, which was not what she had expected. She had expected the theater of power that men like him performed when they had leverage. Instead, he simply said nothing, and the nothing felt more deliberate than anything he might have said. The city moved past the windows. She recognized the direction, generally south, then west, out beyond the industrial belt, into stretches of Chicago that the tourist maps did not acknowledge. She tracked the streets as long as she could, and then they left the grid behind and moved through dark roads between stands of dead trees, and she lost the thread. The house appeared through the trees as a mass of stone and light, Victorian in its bones, but renovated into something harder and less apologetic. There were men at the gate. There were cameras she counted as she walked from the vehicle to the front door. The grounds were lit well enough that there were no real shadows except the ones the building threw. Stellan held the front door without ceremony. She walked inside. The interior was warm, which was the first thing she registered after 40 minutes of rain and cold. The second thing was that it was not what she had imagined. It was not a monument to violence or acquisition, not the gilded cave of a man who wanted you to know he had won. There were books. There was art that had been chosen rather than collected. The furniture was dark and heavy and undecorated. A woman in her 50s appeared from a corridor and exchanged a few words with Stellan in a low voice. He said something back. The woman gave Mara a flat, unsurprised look and disappeared. "There is a room on the second floor," Stellan said. "Hot water, clean clothes. I am not staying." He looked at her with the expression of a man exercising considerable patience. "You have no coat, no phone, no car, and your father's people will be looking for you within 40 minutes if they have not started already. You will stay tonight. Tomorrow is your decision." She wanted to argue with that. She wanted to find the seam in it where she could insert her refusal, but the logic of it was airtight in the way that good traps were airtight, and she was tired in a way that went deeper than the rain. "I want to know what is on the drive," she said. Something moved behind his eyes. "So do I. Get dry first. There is food. Then we talk." She stood in the foyer of Stellan Greer's fortress with her dress dripping onto stone floors and looked at the man who had just watched someone kneel for execution and was now telling her to get dry first. And she thought about her father's hand and the boardroom voice and the marriage contract that existed somewhere with her name already on it. She thought about Eli's door in the corridor, the one she had passed on the way out. She followed the woman upstairs. The room was at the end of a corridor, simply furnished with a window that looked out at the dark grounds and a bathroom that smelled of cedar and clean water. She peeled the ruined dress off her body and stood under the shower for a long time and watched the blood from her lip go pink and then clear, and thought about her mother. Her mother had left this family, or her mother had tried to. Mara had always believed it was the weakness her father said it was. She stood under the hot water and let that belief move through her one last time, and then she let it go because something about the evening, the flat precision of her father's eyes, the practiced efficiency of the hand that hit her, the way he had straightened his cuffs afterward, made her understand that she had never been allowed to believe anything accurate about her mother. She dried off. She put on the clothes that had been left, dark trousers, a wool sweater, both slightly too large. She sat on the bed for a moment and held the flash drive in her palm and looked at it. Then she went back downstairs. Stellan was in a room off the main corridor, a study of some kind, seated at a long table with a laptop open. He had changed out of the wet coat. He looked up when she came in and gestured at the chair across the table without speaking. She sat down. She set the flash drive on the table between them. He picked it up, turned it over once, and inserted it into the laptop. His face as the files loaded was absolutely unreadable, and she watched it because she had nothing else to go on trying to parse whatever was on that drive from the micro movements of a face that had been trained to give away nothing. Then she saw it, just for a half second, a tightening around his jaw, the smallest shift in how he was breathing. "What is it?" she said. He did not answer immediately. He read for another minute. Then he leaned back in his chair and looked at her with an expression she had not seen on his face yet. Something careful, almost reluctant, the look of a man deciding how much of the truth the situation required. How much do you know about your father's freight operations, he said. Overseas shipping, port contracts, standard logistics. There is nothing standard about any of this. He turned the laptop to face her. She leaned forward and read. It took her several minutes because her mind kept refusing that what her eyes were giving. It kept trying to find the alternate interpretation, kept looking for the door in the data that led somewhere else. But the data did not have another door. The Voss Group's overseas freighted infrastructure, the contracts, the route maps, the manifest modifications, the shell companies holding the holding companies resolved into a single, unambiguous picture. Her father was not moving cargo, he was moving people. She sat with that for a long time. The room was very quiet. Somewhere outside, the rain had finally stopped. Harlan Beckett is in here too, Stellan said. He was not looking at the screen. He was watching her. Crown Dynamics has been providing the logistics technology, the encryption, the scheduling systems. Voss moves the ships. Beckett makes them invisible. They are partners, she said, since your mother was still alive. 10 years at minimum based on the earliest manifest alterations in this directory. She looked up from the screen. Stellan met her eyes and said nothing and let the implications sit. Something very cold and very slow moved through her chest. She thought about what she knew about her mother's death, the version she had been given, the version that had been given to the press. The clean, sad story of a woman overwhelmed by wealth and isolation and her own fragile mind, who had taken too many pills on a Tuesday night in December while her daughter was at boarding school and her son was at hockey practice and her husband was in Brussels on business. Tell me what you know, she said. There is a file in the second directory dated 14 months before the official death record. She found the file. She read it twice. She set the laptop down on the table very carefully, the way you set down something you do not want to break. And she sat with her hands flat on the table and breathed through whatever was happening inside her chest, breathed through it the way she had learned to breathe through things in her father's study evenly and without making it visible. Her mother had found the shipping manifests. Her mother had copied them. Her mother had contacted a journalist. The preliminary email exchanges were in the file, and her father had known within 72 hours because her father had eyes in every room of every building he owned. And what happened next was not pills on a Tuesday night in a tragedy. What happened next was in the file. She was going to expose him, Mara said. Her own voice sounded far away to her. Stellan said nothing. He found out and he... She stopped. She breathed. She asked the question she had been building toward since she read the first line of the file. Eli found out too. Didn't he? It was not a question. It had never felt right, Eli's death. She had told herself it was grief. That grief made you look for patterns in random things. That there was no conspiracy. That families simply had more than one tragedy. Stellan reached across the table and turned the laptop back toward himself and closed the file directory without answering, and that was answer enough. Mara sat in Stellan Greer's study in the middle of the night with the remains of her family history scattered across a flash drive between them, and she felt the thing that had been cold and still behind her sternum since the study, since the hand, since the straightened cuffs began to shift into something else, something that had edges and direction and considerable heat. She looked up at Stellan. I need a gun, she said. He studied her face for a long moment with those dark eyes that gave away almost nothing. Almost. Then he said very quietly, not tonight. I am not asking about tonight. He looked at her for another beat. Something moved at the back of his expression, too fast to name, too deep to quite reach. Outside the window, the grounds of Blackthorn Manor sat in the dead quiet that follows a long rain. The trees still and dark, the lights along the perimeter holding the dark at bay. Get some sleep, he said finally. She pushed back her chair. She stood. She was almost at the door when his voice came after her. Mara. She stopped. The drive, he said. Your father knows it is gone. She turned and looked at him across the room. Then he knows I have it, she said. Stellan Greer looked back at her from across the table with the flash drive still sitting between them and said carefully and without any inflection, she could definitively identify yes. He does. She held his gaze for 3 seconds. Then she turned and went upstairs to the room at the end of the corridor and she lay down on the clean sheets in the dark, and she did not sleep. She thought about her mother and about Eli, and about the file and the shifts and the manifests, and the name Harlan Beckett, and the name Conrad Voss, and the sound a hand makes against a face in a room where all the portraits look the same. And she thought about what she had said to Stellan. Not tonight, but tomorrow. Tomorrow was coming. And somewhere below her, in a stone study with a long table and a laptop and a flash drive full of the worst truths she had ever read, the most feared man in Chicago was making calculations that she was only beginning to understand. The question that kept her staring at the ceiling until the first gray light came through the window was not whether she was safe. It was whether safe was something she still wanted to be. She did not sleep. Not really. She drifted in and out of something that felt like sleep, the way a shallow puddle feels like a lake. The surface was there, but there was no depth to it, no real rest underneath. She lay on the clean sheets in the dark room and listened to the house settle around her and watched the gray light change the quality of the shadows on the ceiling. And every time she got close to something that might have been unconsciousness, her mind threw up another image from the file, and she was awake again, heart kicking against her ribs, mouth dry. Her mother's handwriting in the email drafts, the dates on the manifest alterations, the gap between when her father left for Brussels and when the call came through to the school. 72 hours. She stared at the ceiling and counted the hours she had been in this house and decided it was somewhere around 5 and got up. The corridor was empty. The house made the sounds that stone houses make in the dead of early morning, creaks that had nothing to do with occupation, the tick of pipes, a draft from somewhere working its way under a door. She found the kitchen by memory and made coffee and stood at the window drinking the first cup black and watched the grounds come into focus as the dark thinned. There were 2 men visible at the perimeter. They moved in a pattern that looked casual and was not. She was on her second cup when Stellan appeared in the kitchen doorway. He was already dressed. She did not know if he had slept and did not ask. He looked at the coffee pot, looked at the cup in her hand, and crossed to the cabinet to get his own without a word. He poured. He leaned against the counter on the opposite side of the kitchen and drank and looked out the same window she had been looking out. 2 full minutes passed without either of them speaking. It was not comfortable, but it was not hostile. It was the silence of 2 people each waiting to see who would move first, and both deciding for separate reasons that it would not be them. Stellan broke it. "How much do you know about what your father does with the revenue?" he said. "Offshore accounts, tax exposure management," I assumed. "That is the top layer." He set down his cup. Underneath that are 7 shell structures registered across 4 jurisdictions. Underneath those are operating accounts that move money in patterns your father's accounting team designed specifically to resist forensic analysis. He paused. "I have been looking at it for 6 months." She turned from the window. "Wait, because he runs freight through 3 of my ports without my permission, and I needed to know what he was running before I decided what to do about it." "You did not know what was on the drive before last night." "I knew it was worse than tax exposure." His jaw set. "I did not know how much worse." She looked at him across the kitchen and tried to find the angle in it. There was always an angle. That was something her father had drilled into her before the coldness between them calcified into something permanent. Everyone operated from an angle. The question was whether you could identify it before it identified you. "What do you want?" she said. "Right now to understand what is on that drive completely before your father's people find a way to neutralize it. And after that." Stellan looked at her steadily. "That depends on choices you have not made yet." She set down her cup. "I am not a piece on your board, Greer. I am aware of that. Then stop talking to me like I am a resource you are assessing." Something shifted in his expression. "Not much, but enough." "Fair," he said. She had not expected that. She had not expected the word to come out flat and undefended with nothing underneath it trying to take it back. She looked at him for a beat and then looked away out at the pale morning light moving across the grounds. "My father will send people here," she said. "He will send people to the locations he knows about. He does not know about this one. He knows about more than you think he does. That is his single genuine talent. He knows things he is not supposed to know, and he does not let you know he knows them until it is too late to matter." She heard the bitterness in her own voice and did not bother moderating it. "He had informants inside 3 different law firms before I was out of secondary school. He has someone inside the FBI field office in Chicago. He has. She stopped. Stellan was watching her very carefully now. He has someone inside your organization, she said. The air in the kitchen changed. Stellan did not move. His face did not change either, but something behind his eyes went very sharp and very still, in the way that predators went still before they committed to motion. He set down his coffee cup with careful, controlled slowness. That is a significant claim, he said. I read the same files you did. She held his gaze. There was a subdirectory in the third folder. Communications logs. Someone has been feeding my father port information, arrival schedules, cargo inspection, windows, staff rotations. The logs go back 8 months. You had 4 hours with those files. I read fast. The sender identifier was redacted, but the communication pattern matches internal operational data. Someone close to you, close enough to have access to port scheduling. Stellan was quiet for a long moment. The quality of the silence between them had shifted entirely. It had weight in it now in edges. That directory, he said. Show me. They went to the study. The flash drive was still in the laptop where he had left it. She found the subdirectory in under a minute and stepped back to let him read. She watched his face while he did. He read for 6 minutes. She counted. When he looked up, there was nothing in his face that she could use. It had gone completely expressionless in a way that the late-night version of him had not been. This was the version of Stellan Greer that the city was afraid of, she realized. Not the stillness on the dock. This, the absolute removal of feeling from a face that was underneath thinking through something dangerous with complete and unhurried precision. Who else has seen this, he said. No one. I only found it last night. You are certain. I have not left this house, and I have not spoken to anyone except you. She paused. I am not trying to use it against you. I am telling you because if my father has someone inside your operation, then this location is not as safe as you think it is, and we both need to know that. He looked at her for a moment. Why, he said. Why what? Why tell me? You could have kept that information. Used it. For what? She heard her own voice go honest in a way she had not planned. I do not have any other leverage. I have $40 in a flash drive. My father just tried to sell me to a man I have been afraid of since I was 23. My mother is dead and my brother is dead. And the file I found last night tells me neither of those things was an accident. She held his gaze. I am not playing a long game against you, Greer. I do not have the resources for a long game. I told you because you needed to know and because you are the only person in the city who has any reason to help me. The silence after that was different again. Stellan looked at her with an expression she could not name. Then he looked back at the screen and closed the laptop with a sound that was very final. I need to make calls, he said. Within the hour. He stood. Eat something. Do not leave the house. He was at the door when she said the person feeding my father information. When you find out who it is, I want to know. He paused in the doorway without turning around. Because I have spent 27 years being kept away from the truth of things, and I am done with that. Her voice was steady, and she made sure it stayed that way. I am not asking to be involved in what you do about it. I am asking you not to lie to me by omission. If I am staying in this house, I need to know what is happening in it. A beat. All right, he said, and left. She sat in the study alone for a while. Then she went to the kitchen and found bread and cheese and ate standing at the counter because sitting felt like too much of a concession to normalcy, and nothing about any of this was normal. She was trying to hold that clearly in her mind, rather than letting the warmth of the house and the coffee and the competence of the man moving through it convince her that she was anything other than in the middle of a crisis. Her father would be looking for her, Harlan Beckett would be looking for her. And somewhere inside Stellan Greer's organization, someone was taking their calls. She needed to be useful. That was the only currency she had right now. Information access, the things she knew about Conrad Voss's operation that had not been on that drive. She had been adjacent to her father's business for 15 years in the way that women were allowed to be adjacent to things. Present at dinners, visible at events peripheral to conversations that stopped when she walked fully into the room. She had learned to hear the half-sentences. She had learned the names of the men who came and went. She had stored it all away because she had been afraid to use it. She was not afraid of very much anymore. Stellan came back 40 minutes later. He stopped in the doorway. His face had closed even further, and she could see the controlled set of his jaw from across the room. "You were right," he said. She felt no satisfaction in that whatsoever. "Who?" she said. "Owen Farrell." He said it without visible emotion. "My port operations director, 8 years." She watched him say it and watched what it cost him to say it and did not say anything about what she was seeing because he did not need that from her right now. 8 years was not a business relationship that got compromised. 8 years was something else entirely. The kind of thing that lived under trust, not above it. "What are you going to do?" she said. "I already did it." His voice was precise and gave away nothing except the precision itself. "He has been removed from access. He will be questioned today." And then, Stellan looked at her steadily. "And then, that question will have an answer." She understood what he meant and did not push further. He moved to the table and sat down and folded his hands on the surface in front of him. "Your father moved a shipment 6 weeks ago through the Calumet port. 83 people. It was logged as industrial equipment from a facility in Eastern Europe. The receiving address was a processing warehouse in rural Indiana. The facility has since been emptied." She sat down across from him. "He is going to move another one," she said. It was not a question. It had the shape of logic, the inevitable next step. "Within the next 30 days, there is a freight window. Container inspections are reduced during the port union contract renegotiations. He has used the same window twice before." He unfolded his hands and pressed them flat on the table. "That window opens in 18 days. You want to stop it?" "I want to expose it." He looked at her directly. "Stopping one shipment does not end the operation. Exposing the infrastructure does. The routes, the shell companies, the officials on the payroll, all of it at once. That is the only way it does not just reassemble itself under a different name." She looked at him across the table. "You have been gathering information for 6 months. Planning requires leverage I did not have." He met her eyes. "The drive changes that." She understood the shape of what he was telling her. The drive was the architecture, the financial records, the communications logs, the manifest alterations laid over whatever Stellan had been building for months. It was enough to take to federal investigators, enough to construct an exposure that could not be buried. "My father has someone inside the FBI field office," she said. "I know who it is." She blinked. "You do?" "I have known for 2 years. I have been leaving that particular piece on the board because an asset you know about is more useful than one you do not." He paused. "But there are federal investigators above the field office level who are not compromised. I have contact with 2 of them." She looked at him and felt something she had not expected. Not safety exactly, not trust, but something more specific than either. The recognition that she was sitting across from someone who operated at the same level of structural thinking her father did, but aimed at different ends, and who was telling her the truth about his resources rather than performing them. "What do you need from me?" she said. "Everything you know about the operation, not from the drive. From being Conrad Voss's daughter for 27 years. Names, relationships, the things that do not get written down." He held her gaze. "And I need to know if you can hold together long enough to do this, because what you read in those files last night would have broken most people, and if it has broken you, I need to know that now." The question landed clean and without apology. She appreciated the absence of apology. "I have not broken," she said. "You are sure?" "I am angry." She said it clearly. "There is a difference." He looked at her for a moment. Then he nodded once. "Good." They worked through the morning and into the afternoon. She talked and he listened, and occasionally asked questions that were short and specific and revealed how much he already knew by the precision of what he asked about. She gave him names, politicians she had seen at her father's private dinners, judges who had sent birthday cards, executives whose companies appeared in the drive's shell structure. She gave him the geography of her father's operation as she had absorbed it sideways over 15 years. The warehouses, she had been told, were distribution centers. The shipping routes described as standard freight. Stellan's questions became sharper as the afternoon progressed. By 3 o'clock, she understood that some of what she was giving him was confirming things he had suspected, and some of it was genuinely new, and the new things made his jaw tighten in a way she had started reading as the physical expression of his mind accelerating. Around 4, he stopped her. "Harlan Beckett's security team," he said. How many people and where are they based? She frowned. Why Beckett specifically? Because your father is the freight. Beckett is the technology, the encryption systems, the communication protocols, the scheduling architecture. All of it runs through Crown Dynamics infrastructure. You destroy the freight without destroying the technology, and the technology gets licensed to someone else, and the operation continues. He looked at her. To end this permanently, we need the Crown systems, the servers, the code architecture, the client lists. And those are held inside Crown Dynamics facilities that have their own security apparatus. She thought about Harlan Beckett, about his smile and the controlled way he moved through rooms, and the way other men who were powerful deferred to him at her father's events while pretending not to. About what she knew of his security arrangements. There are three facilities that matter, she said. The downtown campus is visible, but it is not where the sensitive systems are. There is a secondary building in Evanston he calls a data research center. The employees do not have full access to their own floor plans. And there is a private estate in Lake Forest with a dedicated server room that is not on any corporate filing. Stellan was writing by hand, small and extremely precise. The Lake Forest property, he said. You have been there 3 times for private events. She paused. I know the layout of the ground floor in the eastern wing. The server room is accessed through a corridor behind the kitchen. I know that because I followed Beckett once at one of those events. He left a conversation in a way that felt wrong to me, and I wanted to know where he was going. She stopped again. I do not know what I expected to do with that. I just kept track of things. Stellan looked up from his writing. You have been keeping track of things for years, he said. It was not an accusation. Something in his tone was careful with it, almost precise. It felt safer than not knowing, she said. He looked at her for a moment with an expression she still could not fully read. Then he looked back at his notes and said it probably was. They stopped around 6 when food appeared. Mara ate without tasting much. Stellan ate the same way. They were both somewhere else, and the somewhere else was the same place. It was after 8 when his phone rang. He looked at the screen and his face changed. Not much, but she was learning to read the increments. He stepped into the corridor. He was gone for 4 minutes, and when he came back, he stood in the doorway and looked at her with an expression that had gone back to the careful assessing quality she had seen in the early hours. Your father held a press conference this afternoon, he said. She waited. He reported you missing. He gave a statement about your mental health history. His voice was precise and uninflected. He said you have a pattern of erratic behavior under stress and that he is concerned for your safety. The room was very quiet. He is building the narrative, she said. Her own voice came out steady. If I surface holding that drive, he needs a reason why anything I say is unreliable. Yes. He has done this before, she said. She said it out loud for the first time and heard the flatness of it. With my mother. He managed the story before she could tell it herself. Stellan said nothing. He did not need to. She looked at the table at the notepad where Stellan's handwriting laid out the skeleton of something that had been a theory this morning and was beginning to have the shape of a plan. She thought about 18 days. She thought about 83 people in shipping containers logged as industrial equipment. She thought about her father's face and the way he had straightened his cuffs. We cannot wait 18 days, she said. He will use the next 2 weeks to close off the avenues we are building. He will move assets, shut down accounts, shift the routes. She shook her head. He has done this before too. He dismantled 2 previous investigations before they became public. Stellan was quiet. Then he said he knows you have the drive. He knows you came south. He does not know you are here, but he is going to start working outward from what he does know, and he will narrow it down. He paused. We have less than 2 weeks before this location becomes compromised, possibly less. So we move faster. He looked at her steadily. Moving faster means more exposure, more risk. I understand that. It means you become visible. Your father and Beckett will know you are working against them actively. They will respond to that. I know what they will do. I know exactly what they are capable of. I read the same file you did. She looked at him steadily. My mother knew. My brother knew. Both of them are gone. She paused. I am not going to make their mistake. What mistake is that? Moving alone, she said, being afraid. The study was very still. Outside, the night had come down hard and fast. the kind of November night that pressed against windows like it wanted to get in. Stellan stood in the doorway with his notepad in his hand and looked at her across the room and said nothing for a long moment. Then he walked back to the table and sat down and picked up his pen. "Tell me everything you know about Beckett's Lake Forest property," he said. "Every detail. Start with the layout you remember from your last visit." She pulled her chair closer and began to talk. They worked until midnight, then until 1. She lost track of the hours somewhere around the time they moved from the study to the long table in the adjacent room, where Stellan spread out physical maps and began marking the Lake Forest estate infrastructure with a precision that told her he had been building this picture for a very long time. At some point after 2 in the morning, standing over a property diagram, with his pen in her hand marking inspection windows, she remembered from overheard conversations. She became aware that the thing happening in this room was not what she had imagined for herself 6 months ago, or 6 days ago, or even 6 hours ago. She was building something. Not a legal challenge, not a press campaign, but a systematic dismantling from the inside out of the infrastructure her father had spent 20 years constructing. And the man helping her build it was someone she had known for less than 24 hours and could not entirely trust and could not afford not to. She put the pen down. "I need to sleep," she said. "Real sleep, not what I got last night." He nodded. She was at the door when she said, "When the information from Owen stops flowing, my father will know the leak is closed." "Yes, that is going to accelerate his timeline." "Yes," Stellan's voice was precise, "which is why tomorrow we stop gathering information and start using it." She stood in the doorway and thought about that. Thought about what it meant, where the line was the last moment before something was reversible and the first moment after when it was not. "Tomorrow," she said. "Get some sleep, Mara." She went upstairs. She lay down in the dark, and this time exhaustion had finally overridden everything else. She was almost under when the sound reached her. Not from inside the house, from outside, from the perimeter of the grounds. She was off the bed before she was fully awake. Some animal part of her brain that had been running threat assessments in her sleep firing before her conscious mind caught up. She was at the window in 4 steps. The grounds looked empty. The perimeter lights held their positions. The 2 guards she had noted at dawn were gone. That was wrong. She was out of the room and moving down the corridor before she finished the thought. No shoes, bare feet on cold stone hands skimming the wall in the dark. She hit the staircase at a run and came down fast and turned toward the study, and the study door was open, and the room was dark and empty, and the maps were gone from the table. "Stellan." She kept her voice low. She was not going to be loud until she knew what loud would bring. She found him in the corridor off the main hall. He had his phone to his ear and a weapon in his other hand held low and without drama. When he saw her, his face registered something that was almost relief before it steadied again. "East perimeter," he said quietly. 3 men. They cut the secondary fence line. "Your guards." "Repositioned. Moving to intercept." He looked at her bare feet. "We may need to move quickly. Get your shoes." She was already going back for them. She grabbed the shoes and the drive. The drive was the first thing her hand found sitting on the nightstand where she had left it, and she closed her fingers around it. She was back in the corridor in under a minute. Stellan was at the top of the main stairs. He held up one hand without turning around. She stopped, listened. Below a door, not breaking, opening, with a key or the thing that substituted for one. The particular sound of a lock giving way to something it was not supposed to give way to. Then footsteps on the stone. More than one set. Stellan turned and moved toward her without hurrying, because hurrying made noise. He put his hand on her shoulder and steered her left away from the main staircase toward the back of the upper floor. She did not ask questions. She moved. The back stair was narrow and dark and smelled of old wood. They went down in single file and came out through a door she had not known existed into a utility corridor behind the kitchen. The sound of the intruders was above them, now moving through the main floor. They came out into the cold. The night was clear and brutal. The temperature dropped since she had last been outside, the kind of dry November cold that got into your lungs immediately and made everything feel sharper and slightly unreal. Stellan moved across the rear grounds at a pace she had to stretch to match, staying close to the building line, keeping the stone wall at his left shoulder. A vehicle was parked at the rear service entrance, something smaller and older and less conspicuous than the black SUVs. A man she did not recognize was behind the wheel with the engine running. Stellan opened the rear door and they got in, and the car was moving before she had fully closed her side. She looked back through the rear window as the manor receded. She saw lights inside, windows illuminated one by one as the men who had come through the east fence moved room to room. Blackthorn Manor lit up and occupied by the wrong people getting smaller in the glass. How did they find it, she said. Stellan was looking at his phone. Owen gave them more than port schedules. His voice was controlled and precise. He gave them property records, all of them. He had been building a comprehensive file for months. Safe houses, vehicles, personnel. He paused. I underestimated the scope of it. She heard what that cost him to say. She did not comment on it. Where are we going? A secondary location. 40 minutes west. He put the phone away. We have approximately 6 hours before the drive becomes irrelevant. She turned to look at him. Explain that. He looked at her in the dark of the moving car with an expression that was doing a great deal of work to stay level. Your father called a private meeting tonight while we were working. I received word 20 minutes ago from one of my federal contacts. He paused, and the pause had weight in it. He is moving the freight operation. All of it. Routes, shell structures, the entire logistics architecture. He is dissolving the current configuration and rebuilding from a clean position. He looked at her steadily. If he completes the restructure, the documentation on that drive becomes partially obsolete. The account numbers, the route designations, the shell companies. They will be abandoned entities pointing at empty rooms. She processed that. He knows I have the drive, she said. Yes, he knows what is on it. He knows we have been looking at it. So he is not trying to get it back. She heard her own voice go quiet and precise in a way that scared her slightly. He is making it not matter. That is what I believe. How long does he need? My contact estimates the restructure is 30 to 40% complete as of this evening. At current pace, he stopped. Tell me. 12 hours, possibly less. The car moved through darkness, the highway almost empty at this hour, the flat Illinois landscape spreading out on either side. She sat with the drive in her hand and thought about 12 hours and thought about the months Stellan had spent building his picture and the days she had spent adding her own knowledge to it. And all of it pointed at a structure that was currently being disassembled in real time by a man who had more warning than they had accounted for. She closed her hand around the drive. Then your contact's timeline might be optimistic, she said. Stellan said nothing, which was its own answer. The secondary location was a converted industrial unit on the edge of a town that did not have enough presence to have a name on the highway signage. The driver coded them through a rolling gate and parked inside. When the metal door came down behind the vehicle, the outside world went completely silent. Inside, the space had been reconfigured into function rather than comfort. Workstations, communications equipment, a bank of monitors running feeds she could not immediately identify. 3 people were already there, 2 men and a woman, all with the look of people who had been awake and working for hours. They looked at Stellan when he came in and did not look at her, which told her their discipline was practiced. Stellan spoke to them quietly. Then he came back to her. I need to call my contacts now, he said. What we have on the drive, even if the restructure completes, we have historical documentation. It will not shut down the future operation, but it will expose the existing one. People go to prison. That matters. It matters less if the network just rebuilds, she said. Yes. And the shipment, the one in 18 days, if he restructures the route architecture, we lose the ability to predict the timing. He held her gaze. He may accelerate it, use the disruption window to move sooner while attention is on the restructure. 83 people, she said. Yes. She thought about the Lake Forest property, the server room behind the kitchen corridor, the 3 visits, the layout she had memorized, the way she memorized things that felt important before she knew why they were important. The Crown's systems, she said. If we had access to the actual server architecture, the client lists the operational code, not just the documentation the drive gives us the live systems. Would that change the equation? Stellan looked at her carefully. It would change the equation entirely. With the live systems, we could map the restructured routes as they are built. We would have the new account structures, the new shell configurations in real time. He paused. But accessing the Lake Forest facility, I know the layout. Knowing the layout is not the same as I know, she said. I am not suggesting we drive there tonight. I am asking you whether it changes the equation. Answer that first. A pause. Yes, he said. It changes everything. Then that is what we do next. She looked at the workstations at the people Stellan had positioned here in advance because he was the kind of man who built contingencies for his contingencies. Make your calls. Give the federal contacts what is on the drive. Slow him down as much as possible. She looked back at Stellan, and then we take the Lake Forest option. He studied her for a moment. Then he turned to his team without further debate, and the room shifted into a different gear. She found a chair at the edge of the workspace and sat down and let herself be still for a moment. Her hands were steady. She noticed that and moved on. The next 2 hours were a different kind of work. She listened as Stellan conducted 3 calls in succession, each one more technical and more specific than the last, walking federal investigators through a documentation structure on a flash drive that she held in her own hand while they talked about it. The investigators asked sharp procedural questions that told her they had been waiting for exactly this kind of material. Stellan answered with the precision of someone who had prepared these answers before the calls. At 2:15 in the morning, the woman at the central workstation said they have completed the account restructure. 60% of the shell network has been dissolved. Mara looked at Stellan across the room. He finished his call. He set the phone down. He sat for a moment with his hands flat on the table in front of him, and she watched him do the same thing she had done in the car. Absorb the new reality, recalibrate, move forward rather than stay with what could not be changed. The federal team is moving on what we gave them, he said. 3 arrest warrants by morning based on existing evidence corroborated by the drive. It will be public by noon. He looked at her. Your father will know within the hour that we made contact. Good. She meant it completely. Let him know. Let him know we still have the drive and we are not done. She paused. I want him afraid. Stellan looked at her with an expression she was only beginning to be able to read. Something that was not quite admiration and not quite assessment sat somewhere between them in a register she did not have clean language for. There is something I have not told you, he said. She waited. The woman who ran communications for the Voss group, he said. Claire Ashford. She left the company 14 months ago. I remember. My father said she pursued other opportunities. She had been with us for 11 years. She did not pursue other opportunities. His voice was steady and careful. She was removed because she found documentation similar to what is on that drive. She brought it to your father privately. She thought it was a mistake, an oversight. She gave him the opportunity to address it. Stellan stopped, then continued. She is alive. He said it immediately, and she understood from the immediacy that he had known she would need that confirmed first. She has been in federal witness protection for 9 months. She came forward on her own. He paused. She is the reason I have the 2 federal contacts I called tonight. She made the introduction through intermediaries 8 months ago. 8 months ago, Mara said. The same timeline as Owen. She sat very still and let the shape of that arrange itself. My father found out she had talked to federal investigators. Yes, and Owen was already feeding him information 8 months ago. Owen told him about Claire. Stellan's jaw moved. The federal file on your father's operation was corrupted 9 months ago. Key documents disappeared from the secure evidence system. The case was deprioritized. He met her eyes. The field office asset your father owns was involved in the corruption of that file. She looked at her hands. The drive was still in her left hand. She had been holding it for hours. So we have been working towards something that was already tried, she said, and already destroyed. The difference is what is on that drive. His voice was firm. Claire Ashford had internal communications. Important but circumstantial. What you took from your father's office is the financial architecture itself. It is not the same case. But the field office is still compromised. Yes. Which is why the contacts I called tonight operate at the district level above the field office's jurisdiction. This cannot go through normal channels. It has to go up and around specifically because the normal channels have been contaminated. She breathed through the information organized. It put it in order. You have known about Claire since you started building this case, she said. Yes, you did not tell me. No, why? He was quiet for a moment. Because knowing about her changes the emotional weight of what you are doing. It means someone already tried this and nearly disappeared for it. It means the system your father has built inside legitimate institutions is more extensive than it looks from the outside. He paused. I needed you clear-headed. I needed you functional. Don't. She said it without heat, but with enough precision that it stopped him. Do not tell me you managed what I was told to protect my functionality. I told you last night I was done being managed. She held his gaze. I understand you made a judgment call. I am telling you not to make it again. He looked at her for a long moment. All right, he said. She let it go. There was not time for anything that was not forward motion. Is there anything else you have not told me, she said. He was quiet for 3 seconds, long enough that she felt the thing coming before he said it. Your brother, he said. She went very still. Stellan's voice was careful and exact. The overdose ruling, the evidence that supported it. Tell me, she said. Her voice was steady. She made it steady. It was manufactured. The toxicology report was altered after submission. The original findings indicated something different. He paused. Eli did not take anything voluntarily. The levels in the report, the substance combination, the timeline, they do not match voluntary ingestion. They match something administered. Another pause. He was 20 years old. The room continued its hum around her. Someone across the workspace was saying something about a server timestamp. The monitors ran their feeds. All of it continued normally while she sat in a chair on the edge of the room and held a flash drive and absorbed the worst thing she had ever been told. She had known. That was the part that moved through her like something tearing. She had known, or some part of her had known, in the way that you know things you cannot afford to know. She had stored it away under grief, under the irrational pattern-seeking of loss, under her father's voice, telling her that Eli had always been fragile, had always been drawn to the wrong things, that some people could not be saved from themselves. Her father's voice. She looked at the drive in her hand. How long have you known this? She said. 6 months. The same time I began investigating your father. She stood up. She walked to the far side of the workspace and stood facing the wall with her hand against the concrete and let herself feel the full weight of it. Not just the fact of what had been done to Eli, but the whole shape of it. Eli, at 20, finding the manifest the way their mother had found them. Years before going to their father, the way their mother had gone to their father, carrying the same belief that love was a kind of protection. Carrying it all the way to the end. He had been 20 years old and he had believed that knowing was enough. That finding out and bringing it to the right person would change something. That the right person was their father. He had been right about the knowing. He had been catastrophically wrong about the person. She stood at the concrete wall for a full minute and felt it completely did not pull back from any part of it, and then she came back. She sat down. She looked at Stellan Greer across the table and saw a man who was dangerous and disciplined and had built something careful and comprehensive and had also decided what she needed to know and when she needed to know it, which was a thing she had tolerated from people her entire life and was not going to tolerate again. After this is over, she said, you and I are going to have a different conversation about how you make decisions on my behalf. Yes, he said, without qualification. But right now, she put the drive on the table between them. Lake Forest, when can we move? He looked at her for a moment with that expression she still did not have clean language for. Then he looked at the woman at the central workstation. Pull the Beckett property files, he said. He looked back at Mara. We move in 24 hours. I need to position people and establish an exit route. 24 hours while my father finishes dissolving the financial network. Yes. And while he potentially accelerates the freight movement. Yes. She looked at the drive at the table at the maps that had been transferred from Blackthorn Manor to this location spread across the secondary table to her left. 24 hours of her father running and Beckett restructuring and the field office assets still in place and 8 months of contaminated evidence and Eli at 20 years old. Show me the Lake Forest property files, she said. The woman brought them up on the center monitor. Mara stood and walked to the screen and looked at the architectural drawings and the satellite imaging and began to locate herself inside the space she had walked through 3 times as Harlan Beckett's invited guest, when she had been someone who got invited to things when she had still been a name rather than a threat. She found the eastern wing. She found the kitchen corridor. She traced the route to the server room with her finger against the screen and felt the layout settle into her memory, the way it had settled the moment she had followed Beckett through that door and stood in the corridor and heard the hum of systems she had not understood yet and understood now. Access points, she said. The north face has two service entries. The eastern one runs alongside the heating system. There is a gap in the camera coverage along that face 38 feet because Beckett added the server room as a later addition, and the coverage was never fully extended. Stellan was beside her looking at the same screen. How do you know about the camera coverage? I stood in that corridor for 11 minutes at the third event. I counted the housekeeping staff and tracked their routes and worked out which sections they avoided. She looked at him. I told you I kept track of things. He looked at the screen and then at her, and there was something in his face that was very close to trust, which was different from the assessment that had been there before. His phone vibrated. He looked at it. She watched his face do the thing it did when information was reorganizing itself behind it. The small tightening, the brief, absolute stillness. What she said. He looked up from the phone. My federal contact. The arrest warrants. He paused. They have been blocked. She stared at him. That is not possible. You said the contacts were above the field office. They are. The block did not come from the field office. His voice was careful and very precise, and she felt the information landing before he finished saying it. It came from above the district level, from a federal position that has jurisdiction over the investigators I contacted. He put the phone down on the table. Someone above your contacts, she said. How far above? He looked at her steadily. Far, he said. She thought about her father and the men she had watched come to his private dinners. The men she had seen in rooms that journalists did not photograph and assistants did not log. The men whose names appeared in conversations that stopped when she walked fully through the door. She thought about what it meant that Conrad Voss had spent 20 years building a network not just inside the city, but inside the systems meant to contain it. He does not just own the field office, she said. No. The contacts you have been protecting for 2 years. He owns that too. Stellan did not answer. He did not need to. The drive in her hand suddenly felt very small. The architecture they had been building, the documentation, the calls, the warrants, all of it had just run into a wall that went higher than either of them had mapped. She looked at Stellan and understood, with a clarity that was almost physical, that what they were about to do had no legal architecture underneath it. No federal warrant, no protected cooperation agreement, no sanctioned operation with a chain of custody and a prosecutor's name attached. Just two people and a flash drive and a server room in Lake Forest and whatever came after. Tell me you still have the physical capability to access that facility, she said. Stellan looked at her for a long moment. Yes, he said. Then we do not change the plan. She held his gaze. We change what we do with what we find. He was quiet. If the legitimate channels are blocked, she said, we find channels that are not. Journalists, international investigators, organizations that operate outside the jurisdiction my father has bought. She felt the shape of it forming as she said it, rough and immediate, and nothing like the careful plan they had been building. We do not hand this to the federal system. We make it so public, so fast, so impossible to contain that even the people he owns cannot bury it in time. Stellan looked at the drive at her at the screen with the Lake Forest property laid out in architectural precision. That kind of exposure puts you directly in the open, he said carefully. No more protected location. No more managed distance. He paused. Your father will have nothing left to lose. I know, you understand what that means. Yes, she did not hesitate. I understand exactly what it means. He held her gaze for 3 more seconds. Then he turned to the woman at the workstation. Push the Lake Forest timeline, he said. We move in 24 hours. He picked up his phone. And get me the journalist contacts. Mara sat back down and looked at the drive in her hand and listened to the room shift back into motion around her. Faster now. The rhythm changed. And she thought about Eli at 20 years old and her mother on a Tuesday in December and the file and the ships and the 83 people in the portrait line corridor of Voss Tower where she had grown up believing certain things were true. None of those things were true. In 24 hours, she was going to walk through a gap in a camera system on the north face of a property in Lake Forest and take a server room apart, if that was what it took. The 24 hours move the way time moves when the thing at the end of it is irreversible. Too fast and too slow simultaneously, each minute either crawling or gone before she registered it. She did not sleep. She stopped pretending she was going to. Stellan's team worked through the night with the focused efficiency of people who had rehearsed for contingencies their entire professional lives. She watched them and learned the rhythms, who deferred to whom, who worked alone, who checked with Stellan before committing to a decision, and who did not need to. She stored it away. She stored everything away now. It was the only thing she knew how to do that felt like control. At 4 in the morning, Stellan found her at the secondary table with a Lake Forest architectural drawing spread in front of her and 2 empty coffee cups pushed to the edge. "The camera gap is 38 feet, she said without looking up. "Not 50. I redrew the sightlines based on the positioning in the property records. That is still workable." "Barely." She pointed to the north face. "Entry here. The service door takes a coded key that Beckett cycles every 6 weeks. Last event I attended was 9 weeks ago." She looked at him. "The code I watched him use will not work." "We are not using the code." He reached past her and pointed to a section of the wall 4 feet left of the service door. "The heating system addition runs a conduit along this face. The conduit access panel sits at ground level, and the interior run connects to a utility space adjacent to the kitchen corridor. It is a tight passage but navigable." She looked at the spot he was indicating. "You have had this planned. I have had the property mapped for 3 months. I was waiting for a reason to use it." He pulled the drawing toward himself and made a small notation. "We go in as 3, you, me, and Dario Vance. He handles the technical extraction from the servers. In and out in 20 minutes if everything holds. And if it does not," he looked at her directly, "then we hold as long as we need to." She looked at the drawing and thought about 38 feet of camera gap and a conduit access panel in Harlan Beckett's Lake Forest estate, where she had sat at a dinner table and smiled and held a wine glass and watched Beckett watch her with those assessing eyes, and understood even then that she was being measured for something she had not consented to. "He will be there," she said. "Tonight." Stellan was quiet for a moment. "Probability is high. The restructure is nearly complete. He will want to be physically present at the primary server location while the new architecture comes online. We account for that." "How?" "By being fast enough that it does not matter." He held her gaze. "If we get into the server room and Dario gets what we need, Beckett's physical presence on the property is a complication, not a catastrophe. If we do not get there fast enough, then his presence becomes the catastrophe," she said. "Yes." She sat with that. Through the high windows, the sky was beginning to think about changing. "I want to know what we are sending out," she said. "When Dario pulls the data, who receives it, and when, and in what form. I want to understand the whole chain before we go in." Stellan nodded. He stood and called Dario Vance over, and for the next 90 minutes they walked her through it. The journalist contacts 3 of them operating across 2 countries with encrypted receiving channels and editorial commitments already in place. The international oversight body that had been building a parallel case on the trafficking network from the European end. The financial crimes unit in a jurisdiction her father's federal contacts could not touch. She asked questions, hard specific questions about verification timelines and publication windows, and what happened if the data was corrupted during extraction. Dario answered in the flat technical language of someone who had done this before, and she listened and understood and pushed back where she thought the chain was weak. By 8 in the morning, she felt if not ready, then clear. That was the most she was going to get. They left at 11, 3 vehicles spread across different departure windows, taking routes that did not share segments. She rode with Stellan in the second vehicle. The city moved past the windows and she watched it. She did not think about her mother. She could not afford backward right now. Stellan drove without speaking for a long time. Then he said without taking his eyes off the road, "After Dario pulls the data and the transmission goes out, there is a window. Maybe 2 hours before your father understands what has happened. In that window, we need to be somewhere he cannot reach. Define cannot reach. Out of the city, I have a route prepared." He glanced at her briefly. "Once the data is public, your father's leverage changes. Right now, he has the federal contacts and the restructured network and the narrative about your mental health. Once the data is out, all he has is desperation. He paused. Desperate men make different choices than men who think they are winning. More dangerous choices. Yes. She looked out the window. Lake Michigan appeared briefly between buildings gray and vast and cold. The November water the color of old iron. You are telling me this does not end when we leave the Lake Forest property? No, it ends when he has nothing left to fight with, Stellan paused. That takes time after the exposure. Days, maybe more. And in those days, we stay alive and we stay together and we trust the process we have set in motion. His voice was steady. That is the job. She said nothing for a moment. Together, she said. He did not answer, but he did not take it back either. They staged 2 miles from the Lake Forest property in a service parking area behind a commercial building that backed onto a watershed preserve. Daria was already there with the equipment cases running final checks on gear she did not have vocabulary for. The third vehicle carried 2 of Stellan's men, who would hold the perimeter positioned to give warning if anything moved on the approach roads. Stellan checked his watch. 40 minutes to full dark. We move at last light. She stood beside the vehicle and breathed the cold air and felt her heartbeat, which was elevated but not panicked, faster than baseline, steady enough to work with. She thought about the conduit access panel in the 38-foot camera gap in the kitchen corridor and the hum of the servers she had heard that night 3 years ago when she had followed Beckett through the door and stood in the corridor and first started understanding that the man her father wanted her to marry was something significantly worse than what his public profile suggested. She had been right. She had been right about everything she had ever half known and had not let herself fully know, and the cost of not fully knowing it was her mother and her brother, and 3 years of performing the role of a daughter who did not ask too many questions. She was done performing. Stellan's voice was quiet beside her. When we are inside, you follow my lead on pace and positioning. If I stop, you stop. If I say we abort, we abort. Understood. No independent decisions once we are through the access panel. She held his gaze. And if something goes wrong, that requires an independent decision. A pause. Then I trust you to make it. He said it like it cost him something to say it, but he said it completely. We clear. We are clear. Dario finished his checks and closed the equipment case and nodded once at Stellan. They moved at last light, cutting through the preserve on foot. The dead November undergrowth crunching softly under their feet despite their best efforts. The temperature had dropped to something with actual teeth in it. She kept Stellan's pace without difficulty. The estate's northern perimeter appeared through the trees. Stone wall, 8 feet with lighting at 40-foot intervals. She had studied the lighting pattern. She knew the gap. They came through the preserve line and crossed the dark ground between the tree line and the wall in under 30 seconds, moving fast and low. She felt her pulse spike hard as they went and breathed through it and kept moving. Stellan's hand went to the stone. He gave her a look. She put her foot in his interlaced fingers and went up and over the wall and landed on the other side on grass that was frozen at the surface, dropping into a crouch and scanning. Nothing. The estate grounds were lit softly at the perimeter, but the interior was shadow-heavy, the large trees throwing dark zones across the lawn. Stellan came over after her, Dario after him. They moved across the grounds in the shadow pattern she had traced on the architectural drawing. She counted paces and landmarks. The oak at 40 feet, the garden wall 20 feet to the right, the service path along the heating conduit. There. The access panel was at ground level, exactly where Stellan's property records had placed it. He crouched beside it and worked on the panel cover with a tool she could not see clearly in the dark. 30 seconds. 40. She watched the grounds and kept her breathing even and felt the cold working through her jacket. The panel came free. The passage was as tight as he had said. She went in first because she was smallest, pulling herself through on her forearms across cold metal. The smell of the heating system surrounding her, immediately the heat itself a shock after the exterior cold. 8 feet through, and then she was in the utility space, concrete floored, low-ceilinged, smelling of machine oil and dust. Stellan came through. Dario with the equipment case came through. She led them through the utility space to the door she had identified on the drawing. It opened onto a service corridor, unpainted walls, fluorescent lights on motion sensors. They triggered as she opened the door, and she stopped breathing for a second before remembering they were motion sensors, not alarms. The corridor ran left toward the kitchen. She turned right toward the server room access point. She counted the feet. 20. The door at the end was heavier than she had expected, steel framed with a keypad. She stepped back and let Stellan look at it and watched him assess it with a focus that was entirely without anxiety, just pure problem-solving attention. After 8 seconds, he reached into his jacket and produced a device she had seen Dario use for the perimeter check. 12 seconds on the keypad, the lock disengaged. The server room was cold climate controlled to a temperature well below the rest of the facility, the air carrying the particular dry electric smell of large-scale computing infrastructure. Racks of equipment ran floor to ceiling along both long walls, indicator lights, blinking in patterns that seemed random and were not. Dario moved to the central rack, immediately case open equipment, out hands already doing things she could not follow. She stayed near the door. Stellan positioned himself between her and the room's interior, facing the way they had come. 12 minutes, Dario said quietly. Maybe 10. She listened to the building, the climate control system, the baseline hum of the servers, the heating system in the walls. She was listening for the thing that did not fit. At the 4-minute mark, she heard it. Footsteps. Not close, but moving toward close. The particular sound of hard soles on stone flooring. 2 sets coming from the direction of the main house rather than the service areas. She put her hand on Stellan's arm. He had heard it too. He was already positioning himself at the door, weapon in hand. He looked at Dario. How long, he said. 6 minutes minimum, Dario said without looking up. Stellan looked at her. She looked at the door. The footsteps got louder. They stopped somewhere on the other side of the kitchen corridor junction. 25 feet away. She heard a voice, but not words. Then another voice. A radio crackle. Security doing a circuit they had not been doing when she attended the previous events, which meant either Beckett had upgraded his rounds since then, or the restructuring activity had put the security team on heightened alert. Both, probably. She looked at Stellan. He held up 3 fingers. 3 minutes. Hold position. The security voices moved again. She tracked the sound. They were moving along the kitchen corridor toward the service area, toward the utility space they had come through. If they found the access panel open, the response time would be under 2 minutes. The entire property would be on them. Dario at the rack said nothing. He was working with his head down, hands moving between devices with a focus to speed that made her think of a surgeon. The security voices were in the utility space now. She could hear the door they had come through opening. She made a decision. She stepped into the corridor. Stellan's hand shot out and caught her arm, and she looked at him and held his gaze, and he saw something in her face that made him release her after 1 second. Not because he agreed with what she was doing, but because there was not time for anything else. She walked down the corridor toward the kitchen junction. The 2 security men came around the corner and stopped when they saw her, and their hands went toward their sides. And she did the thing she had never done before on her own terms. She became entirely and without hesitation the woman she had been performing her entire life, the one who belonged in spaces like this, the one who looked at security teams in her host's private spaces with mild curiosity rather than fear. "Oh," she said, "I am completely lost." She said it with a small, slightly embarrassed laugh. "Harlan said the east guest bathroom was off the kitchen, and I have been in 3 different corridors." She gestured vaguely behind her. "Is it the other direction?" The security men looked at each other. They looked at her. She was wearing dark clothing that was not what a house guest wore to navigate to a bathroom, and her hair was not what a house guest's hair looked like, and there was a slight tremor in her right hand that she could not completely eliminate. But she was Mara Voss. The name still worked on certain faces. She could see it working on one of theirs, the younger one who must have attended enough Voss group events to have the visual reference, whose body language shifted a half degree toward deference in the 3 seconds she held his eyes. Ms. Voss, the younger one, said, "Yes," she smiled. "Terrible at directions. Always have been. The guest facilities are back through the main hall, ma'am. I will find it. Thank you." She was already turning, moving back the way she had come with the unhurried confidence of someone who belonged. Not fast enough to be running, not slow enough to invite them to follow. She turned the kitchen corner and pressed herself against the wall and listened. A beat. 2. She heard them moving back the way they had come. She waited 10 seconds and then moved back to the server room door and pushed through. Stellan looked at her. She looked back at him. She had just used the veil her father had built around her as a weapon for the first time in her life on her own terms. It felt nothing like what she had expected. It felt like taking something back. 4 minutes, Dario said. He had not looked up from the equipment. I need 4 more minutes. She pulled the door closed and positioned herself beside Stellan and watched the corridor through the small glass pane in the door's upper section and breathed through her heartbeat and waited. 3 minutes and 40 seconds later, Dario said, "Got it." He pulled the extraction device from the rack and closed his case and stood up. They moved back through the corridor in the order they had come, faster now, not running but close to it. Through the utility space, the access panel cover was back in place. Stellan went first through the panel. She followed, Dario behind her. The cold outside was violent after the server room climate control. She sucked air and moved across the grounds behind Stellan, back through the shadow patterns, back to the wall, up and over in the same configuration. She dropped to the other side and her right knee came down on uneven ground and a sharp pain went through the joint. She registered it and kept moving. Through the preserve. 40 feet of dead undergrowth and frozen ground. The vehicles were where they had left them. She got in the rear of the first one and pulled the door closed and sat back against the seat and let herself breathe. Real breathing, not the controlled, careful kind. Actual oxygen moving through her because her body needed it. Stellan got in beside her. The vehicle was moving immediately. Full extraction, Dario said from the front seat. Client list operational code, the new architecture as it currently stands. The restructured routes, the new account configurations. Everything they built tonight. Stellan looked at her. She looked back at him. Transmit, he said. Dario opened his case. The next 12 minutes were the longest of her life. She sat in the moving vehicle while Dario worked and watched the Lake Forest streets move past the windows and waited for the sound of pursuit that did not come. At least not yet. Confirm receipt, Dario said. All 3 journalist channels. International Oversight Body. Financial Crimes Unit. She closed her eyes for exactly 3 seconds. Then she opened them. My father, she said. How long until he knows? Someone in Beckett's security team will have found the server room within 20 minutes of us leaving, Stellan said. He will know the extraction happened before midnight. He looked at her. He will know it was you. Good. She said it quietly and completely. Let him know. Where are we going? Out of the city. I have a... His phone vibrated. He looked at the screen. His jaw went tight. She leaned to look. Unknown number. But beneath it a text message with 4 words and a photograph. The 4 words were, I have her too. The photograph was of a woman she did not recognize immediately because she had not seen her in 14 months. And the woman in the photograph looked significantly older than 14 months, could account for haggard and frightened with her hands zip-tied in front of her in what looked like a basement or a storage space. Then she recognized her. Claire Ashford, the woman who had tried to do this first, who had walked into a process alone and trusted it would hold, who was now in a photograph with her hands zip-tied because someone in the protection system had been compromised the same way everything else had been compromised. Conrad Voss had decided that a hostage was what this moment required. Stellan's hand around the phone was very still. She looked at his face and saw something move through it that she had not seen before. Not the controlled, strategic precision, something human and raw underneath. The exposed face of a man who had protected this particular piece of the operation carefully for a long time and was now looking at the evidence that it had not been careful enough. Her father had been waiting, building his counter. The photograph was not improvised. It had been prepared. He had known about the protection arrangement. He had had the time and the reach to find it. A second message from the same unknown number. Come to the tower alone 1 hour, or she does not make it to morning. Voss Tower, the 43rd floor, the origin point. She looked at the message, and then she looked out the window at the Chicago skyline ahead of them and found Voss Tower in the configuration without effort because she had been finding it her entire life. She looked at Stellan. He was looking at her with an expression that was open and direct and gave away the thing he was thinking, which was that she was not going. That no version of this ended with her walking into Voss Tower alone, that there were other options, that Claire Ashford was one life against the exposure already in motion. She could see him deciding how to say it. Don't she said? He stopped. I know what you were gonna say. She held his gaze. I know the logic. I know one life against the network, one person against the documentation we just transmitted. I know the math, she paused. Claire Ashford tried to do the right thing 14 months ago. She walked into the process alone because she believed in it. My father destroyed the process around her, and then he found her and zip-tied her hands in a basement somewhere, and he is using her as a bargaining chip. She looked at Stellan steadily. I am not doing the math on that. He will have the building secured, every remaining asset positioned inside and around Voss Tower. Stellan's voice was controlled and direct. Walking in alone, I said I am not going alone. She met his eyes. I said he told me to come alone. Those are different things. A beat. She watched him understand what she was saying and watched him recalculate and watched the recalculation produce something in his face that was somewhere between fear and a decision already made. You are not walking into that building without me behind you, he said. I know, she said. That is what I am counting on. He looked at her for one more second. Then he leaned forward and said 2 words to the driver. The vehicle changed direction toward the skyline, toward Voss Tower, burning against the November dark with her family's name in letters 40 feet tall. The building where she had been told who she was allowed to be and had believed it for too long. Her knee throbbed where she had come down wrong on the wall. She pressed her hand against it and felt the swelling starting and breathed through it and said nothing about it. Because it did not matter. Because nothing about what her body was doing right now mattered in the way that the next hour mattered. Voss Tower at midnight looked exactly like what it was. A monument to a man who had spent 40 years convincing the world that power and respectability were the same thing. The name ran up the north face in backlit letters, and the lobby was visible through the glass at ground level, marble and steel, in the particular emptiness of a building whose staff had been sent home, whose cameras had been switched to a private feed, whose security had been consolidated upward into whatever Conrad Voss had assembled on the 43rd floor. She knew the cameras were on his feed because 3 of Stellan's people were already in the building system. That had been the first call Stellan made when the vehicle changed direction. By the time they crossed the river, the building's security network had been partially rerouted to a receiver in the second vehicle running 2 blocks behind them. She knew about the 4 men in the lobby because the rerouted feed showed them. She knew about the 2 in the stairwell on 38 and the single man on the elevator landing of 42. What she did not know was where Claire Ashford was being held. The vehicle stopped on Wabash 2 blocks south. Stellan was already looking at his phone at the building schematic running the same calculations she was running. The basement level, she said. Service infrastructure. He would want her away from the active floors. Agreed. He turned the phone toward her. My people can reach the basement via the parking structure entrance on the east side. They will move when we go in the front. He is watching the front entrance. Yes, he looked at her. That is the point. She understood. She walked in the front. Conrad knew she had arrived alone as instructed, and while his attention was on the front of the building and the elevator moving upward, Stellan's team moved through the parking structure and went down. If they find her, she said. When they find her, he said it with a firmness that was its own kind of promise. Elena goes with them. Elena is very good at this particular kind of problem. She looked at the building, 43 floors of glass and steel in her family's name. She thought about everything that had happened in it. The study, the fireplace, the portraits, the hand, the cuffs being straightened. And she thought about what she was walking into and who would be in it. She knew what he would say. She had been hearing it her entire life. The data, she said, it is out. Received and confirmed by all channels. The International Oversight Body has already issued a preliminary hold order on 3 freight accounts. He paused. It is moving. Even if everything inside that building goes wrong tonight, it is moving. I know. She looked at him. I am not asking for reassurance. I am establishing the baseline. Something shifted at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile, something more specific. The baseline is solid. She put her hand on the door handle. Mara. His voice was quiet and direct in the way it was when he was saying something he had decided to say rather than something the situation was producing. She turned. He looked at her with those dark eyes that had stopped being unreadable somewhere in the last 48 hours. Or maybe she had learned to read the depth that had always been in them. "You are not your father's daughter but a night," he said. "You understand what I mean." She did. She had thought about it since the vehicle turned toward the skyline. The difference between what she was doing and what he had done. The line between dismantling a man's operation and becoming an extension of his methodology. She had thought about it and arrived somewhere clear and specific. "I know who I am," she said. She got out of the vehicle. The cold hit her immediately, and she walked into it without adjusting her pace across the sidewalk and through the Voss Tower lobby doors, which were unlocked, which meant he wanted her to come in unobstructed, which meant he was very confident in what waited for her on the 43rd floor. The four men in the lobby watched her cross the marble without moving from their positions. One of them reached for a radio. She did not look at any of them directly. She walked to the elevator bank and pressed 43 and stood with her hands at her sides and watched the numbers climb. She breathed steady and even. Her knee ached from the wall, and she let it ache and stayed with the breath. The elevator opened on 43. The floor was dark except for the study at the far end of the corridor, where the light she had grown up with the amber warmth of the fireplace and the desk lamp bled out under the door and across the hallway floor. She walked toward it, past the portraits, past Eli's door. She stopped. She put her hand flat against Eli's door. 4 seconds. She felt the wood under her palm and let herself feel it completely. He had been 20 years old and he had believed in their father, and that belief had been the thing that killed him. She was standing here because she had stopped believing in time. She pressed her palm against the door one more second. Then she kept walking. She pushed open the study door. Conrad Voss was behind his desk. He looked older than he had looked 4 days ago. The lines in his face ran deeper. The tremor in his right hand was more visible than it had been that first night, and the bourbon glass was mostly gone, and there was a pistol on the desk in front of him to the right of the glass, positioned with the deliberateness of a man who wanted it seen. He was wearing a suit that was still precisely pressed. She had expected nothing less. Even now, even here, he was performing the version of himself that was still in control. She sat down in the chair across from him without being invited. The chair beside the fireplace. Her chair. He looked at her for a long moment. "You look terrible," he said. "I have had a difficult week," she said. Something moved across his face. Not humor. The ghost of the way they had talked when she was young before the coldness became the dominant register of everything between them. She held his gaze and did not let that ghost do anything to her. "The drive is gone," she said. "The data is transmitted. You know that already, or you would have opened differently." His jaw tightened. "Who received it?" "People above your pay grade, above your federal contacts, above the district-level position you used to block the arrest warrants." She watched his face. "You have spent 20 years buying the system from the bottom up. There are levels you did not reach because you ran out of time." "There are no levels I have not reached," he said. His voice was flat, and the flatness was covering something. She could hear what it was covering. Fear did not look like fear on Conrad Voss. It looked like precision. It looked like a man narrowing his vocabulary to the things he could still manage. She let him believe it for exactly one more moment. "3 countries," she said. "Not 1, 3. The overseas financial crimes units do not answer to anyone you have ever met." She held his gaze. "And the journalists have already filed. One piece went live 20 minutes ago." She had checked Dario's confirmation in the elevator. "It is already in the world. There is no version of tonight where you call someone and make it stop." She watched the precision in his face do the thing that precision did when it ran out of calculations. It held for one more second. Then it did not hold anymore. His hand moved toward the pistol on the desk. Not fast, not the movement of someone making a decision, so much as someone whose hand was moving, while his mind was somewhere else reaching for the object that had represented control since he had placed it there. She looked at his hand, at the tremor in it. "Don't," she said. His hand stopped. Not because she had the power to stop him, because the tremor in his hand was the truest thing in the room, and they both knew it, and he knew she saw it. She looked at her father, at the man who had been the entire weather system of her childhood, who had shaped everything she had believed about what she deserved and what she was capable of, and what the world owed her and what she owed the world. She looked at him and felt the full weight of it. Not the anger, not yet, but the grief underneath the anger. The loss of the father he had never been. The version of him she had spent 20 years trying to locate in the actual man and never finding. Claire Ashford, she said. Where is she? He said nothing for a long moment. The fire made its sounds. The city sat 43 floors below in its own noise, oblivious, impermanent. She is alive, he said finally. Basement level. Room 3. His voice was different when he said it. Quieter, as though giving away the one thing he had left cost him a particular kind of effort that his earlier calculations had not required. She is being released right now, Mara said. My people are already in the building. Something moved across his face, not surprise exactly. The recognition of a move he should have anticipated and had not. I want to hear you say it, she said. He looked at her. Not for evidence, not for a recording. She held his gaze. For me. Say it. Conrad Voss looked at his daughter across the desk for a long time. The tremor in his hand was visible against the wood. He was 61 years old and he looked all of it and more. She watched him make calculations behind his eyes and watched the calculations arrive somewhere he had not expected to arrive. Somewhere the options had run out. Your mother made a choice, he said. His voice was flat and very quiet. She chose the operation over the family. Over you and Eli. What I did. He stopped. What you did, she said, was protect what she would have destroyed. She breathed through that. Let it move through her without letting it become the thing that knocked her off the steady place she had built under herself in the past 4 days. Eli, she said. He said nothing. He was 20 years old, she said. He found the manifest and he came to you because he still believed. Her voice caught once briefly. She pushed through it. He still believed you were his father first. He thought you would stop. He thought finding out that he knew would make you stop. Conrad looked at the window. He was going to tell someone, Conrad said. Not an apology, a fact, delivered in the same tone he delivered all facts as if the emotional content of them was someone else's problem. He was your son. He was naive. She looked at him for a long moment. Yes, she said. He was. He believed in you. She stood up. That was the only naive thing about him. Conrad's hand moved toward the pistol on the desk again, this time faster. The movement of a man who had made a decision rather than a man whose hand was drifting. His fingers closed around the grip. She did not move back. She looked at him and saw the thing underneath, the precision and the control in the 40 years of constructed power. She saw a man who was 61 years old and alone in the machine he had built, and had no one left in the world who was not afraid of him or paid by him, and who was holding a pistol in a trembling hand in a room full of portraits of dead men who had all looked exactly like him. There is nothing that gun does for you now, she said quietly. The data is in 3 countries. You are already finished. What happens in this room in the next 10 seconds decides only one thing. He looked at her. What you are in the end, she said. The fire snapped once behind her. The tremor in his hand was visible, even around the grip of the pistol. And then slowly, the way something collapses when the last load-bearing element gives way, his hand lowered. He set the pistol down on the desk with a sound that was very small and very final. And he put both hands flat on the surface in front of him and looked at them and said nothing. She stood in the study with the amber light behind her and the dark corridor ahead and listened to the sound of her father's silence, which was the loudest thing she had ever heard in this room. Her phone vibrated. She looked at it without looking away from him for longer than a second. A message from Stellan's number. 2 words. She's out. She put the phone back in her jacket. Claire Ashford is out of the building, she said. She is safe. She held her father's eyes. The federal authorities will be here in the morning. What you do between now and then is your decision. She looked at him steadily. I am leaving. You are my daughter. I know. She picked up her jacket from the arm of the chair. I know exactly what I am. She walked to the door. It was not supposed to go this far, he said. She stopped. She did not turn around. The voice behind her was quieter than she had ever heard it. Stripped of the boardroom register, stripped of the precision, stripped of everything he had built on top of what was actually there. It was the voice of a man at the end of a very long road who had just put a gun down and understood for the first time what the road had cost. It went exactly as far as you took it, she said. Every step, every choice, every time you decided that what you wanted was worth more than what it took from someone else. She paused. My mother understood that. Eli understood that. They just could not make you. She walked out. The corridor was dark. She passed Eli's door and put her hand flat against it one more time. 3 seconds. 4. Then she kept walking. Past the portraits, past the place where the assistant's desk sat empty to the elevator. She pressed the button and stood with her hands at her sides and waited for the car to come and watched the numbers above the door and did not look back down the corridor toward the light coming from under the study door. Down 43 floors while the city moved outside the glass. Stellan was outside. He was standing on the sidewalk beside the vehicle with his hands in his jacket pockets, and he looked at her when she came through the doors with an expression that was open and direct and asked the question without words. She looked back at him and gave the answer the same way. He nodded once. She is with Elena, he said. 2 cracked ribs, dehydration. She is coherent. He paused. She asked about you. Tell her. She stopped. Thought about what Claire Ashford had done 14 months ago, walking into a process alone, trusting the architecture, believing that doing the right thing was sufficient protection. Tell her it worked, Mara said. Not the way she planned, but it worked. And tell her that what she tried to do mattered. It was part of how we got here. He took out his phone and held the screen toward her. The news application was open, the feed updating in real time. Logo of Voss Tower on the screen, text running underneath, federal hold issued on Voss Group freight accounts. And below that, Crown Dynamics Trading suspended pending regulatory review. She looked at the screen. She looked at the building above her, with her family's name still lit on the north face. Then she looked away from it and did not look back. They drove away from Voss Tower while Chicago moved around the vehicle in its usual oblivious noise. She sat back against the seat and felt the ache in her knee and the thin line of healing on her lip and the deep physical exhaustion that 4 days of running on adrenaline had produced settling into her body now, like something taking up permanent residence. She did not fight it. She let it come. Stellan sat beside her and said nothing for a long time, and the nothing between them was different from the nothing of the first night in the car from the dock, which had been the silence of mutual assessment. This was something else. She could not name it cleanly, and she did not trauma him. My father, she said finally. He will have lawyers by morning. Yes, the international oversight hold on the freight accounts will complicate things considerably. He paused. It will take time. It will not be clean, but it will not stop. And Beckett. His Lake Forest server room was accessed by persons unknown. A pause. The data extracted is currently making its way through channels that will be very difficult for his legal team to address. He said it without satisfaction, just with the precision of a fact. He has a board meeting in 9 days. He will not make it to the meeting. And Owen Farrell, she said. He was questioned through the night. He gave up 3 additional names inside the operation and 1 inside the field office. He looked at her. He will not be a problem going forward. She nodded. She had needed to hear that, not for the satisfaction of it, but because loose ends were how things like this survived. She looked out the window. The lake appeared between buildings one more time, and she watched it black and huge and entirely indifferent to everything that had happened in the past 4 days. The same lake it had been before any of this, which was oddly useful to look at. Where are we going, she said. Out of the city tonight. Tomorrow we make decisions about what comes next. He looked at her. There are people who will want to speak with you. Investigators, journalists. You are the only person with direct personal knowledge of the Voss operation's internal structure. He paused. That makes you significant. That makes me a target. For a while, he said, yes. She thought about that for a while. She was 27 years old and she had been a target in various forms her entire life. For her father's management, for Beckett's acquisition, for the role assigned to her by birth in a family that used its members as instruments. Being a target for telling the truth felt by comparison like a kind of freedom. All right, she said. Tomorrow. They left the city on the interstate, heading south, and then switched to routes that were not interstates, and she stopped tracking where they were, because it did not matter where they were, except that it was away from the name on the building, and the study, and the portrait line corridor, and the version of herself she had been required to perform since she was old enough to perform it. She fell asleep. Real sleep, finally. The shallow thing had been all she had for days, and this was different. This was the actual cessation that a body demanded when it had been running past the point of function. She was aware briefly of the vehicle stopping somewhere, of movement of a room, and then she was not aware of anything until light came through a window, and the light was different from the city's light, softer and more direct. Winter sun through glass without a skyline interrupting it. She lay still for a moment and looked at the ceiling and took inventory. The knee was worse. Her lip had healed to a thin line she could feel with her tongue. She was alive. She got up. The house was small and quiet and smelled of wood smoke. She found the kitchen and stood at the window and looked at the flat winter landscape outside. Illinois flatlands in November, stripped bare with a quality of honesty to them that she appreciated. The land having nothing to hide and making no attempt to hide it. Stellan was at the table with coffee and his phone and the small, precise handwriting on a new page. She poured coffee and sat down. "How long did I sleep?" she said. 9 hours. She looked at the window. The light was mid-morning. "The journalist," she said. "When does the first piece run?" 2 of the 3 channels have already published online. The third is running a longer piece this evening. He looked up from his phone. The freight account holds have been expanded to 7 accounts. Crown Dynamics stock was suspended from trading at market open. He paused. "Your father's lawyer issued a statement 40 minutes ago. Your father was not present for the statement." She looked at her coffee. "He is running," she said. "He will not get far." Stellan set his phone down. The international holds make the usual exits very difficult. The people he would normally call for transit arrangements are currently being interviewed by investigators in 3 countries. He held her gaze. "It ends. Not in the next hour. But it ends." She nodded. She believed him. Not because she needed to believe him. She had seen the data transmission confirmed. She had heard the oversight holds. She had done enough of this in the past 4 days to understand the shape of what was in motion. She believed him because it was accurate. They sat together in the small kitchen for a while. Outside, the flat landscape held its stillness. Somewhere in the next 2 weeks, the thing they had set in motion would reach critical mass and fall under its own weight. The infrastructure folding. The people who had been protected by their proximity to Conrad Voss and Harlan Beckett, suddenly finding that proximity a liability rather than an asset. She knew it would not be clean. She knew some of them would escape consequence. She knew the 83 people from the Calumet shipment were not the only ones, and that the ones before them would be harder to locate and harder to help, and that some portion of what had been done would never be fully accounted for. She sat with that. She did not make it smaller than it was. She did not make it larger than what she had been able to do about it. "Claire Ashford," she said, "physically okay. 2 cracked ribs, dehydration. She is with Elena at a medical contact. She will be transferred to a different protective arrangement within 48 hours, one that does not route through the field office." He paused. "She wants to testify, publicly if it is possible." "It should be possible," Mara said. "What she tried to do, people need to know. Someone tried before us and that they silenced her for it. It is part of the picture." He looked at her. "I will tell her you said that." She finished her coffee. The kitchen light moved across the table as the morning progressed. That flat, honest winter light with nothing to filter it. She was aware that her entire life, as it had been organized until 4 days ago, was gone. The apartment, the role, the name as it had existed in a specific social architecture. All of it would require reconstruction or abandonment or something in between that she did not have language for yet. She found she was not afraid of that. The absence of fear was new, and she sat with it carefully, not wanting to mistake it for something it was not. It was not happiness. It was not certainty. It was the feeling of being exactly where the consequences of her own choices had brought her, without anyone else's architecture surrounding her. And it turned out that feeling stripped of everything else was bearable, more than bearable. "I need to think about what comes next," she said. "For me, not for the case." "Yes," Stellan said. He said it like he had been waiting for her to get there. She looked at him across the table, at the man she had followed off a dock because she had nowhere else to go, who had kept things from her and told her truths that broke things inside her and come back anyway when she had gone too far ahead. She looked at him and thought about the question she had been sitting with since the kitchen of Blackthorn Manor. When this is over, she said, what do you go back to? He looked at her steadily. He had the pen in his hand, but he was not writing. I go back to my operations restructured. Owen's removal opened problems that need addressing. He paused. And I go back to whatever this has become. Whatever this has become, she repeated. He held her gaze without looking away, which was itself an answer. She looked at her hands. The blood was long gone. The palms had healed from the fall on the dock. She looked at them and thought about the woman who had stood at a window in her father's building 4 days ago, looking at her own face in a mirror and deciding something irrevocable, and about the distance between that woman and the one sitting at this table in the flat winter light, and about whether the distance was a loss of something or the arrival at something. I do not know who I am yet, she said. Outside of this, outside of Voss, you know who you are not, Stellan said. That is usually enough to start. Is it, she said. It was for me. He said it without elaboration, but she heard what was underneath it. The shape of a history she did not know all of yet. He did not perform the history for her. He just let her hear the edge of it and trusted her to understand. She did. She looked out the window. The flat landscape was changing as the morning progressed, the light shifting the shadows of the bare trees lengthening as the sun moved. She watched it and thought about Eli, who had been 20 years old and had trusted the wrong person in the worst possible way, and whose last act had been the belief that knowing was enough to change things. He had been right. Knowing had been enough in the end. It had just taken longer than his 20 years of life allowed for, and other people had had to carry it after him. She would carry it. That was not a burden. That was the only form of continuation available. When it is done, she said, not to Stellan directly, more to the room, to the light, to the things she was working out. I want to find the people from the shipments, the ones we can locate. She looked at the table. There are organizations doing that work. I know how operations are structured. I know the shell company patterns. I could be useful. Stellan said nothing for a moment. Yes, he said, you could. She nodded once. Let it settle into something solid. She stood and took her cup to the counter and stood at the window and looked at the stripped November landscape for a while. The flatness of it, the way everything had been reduced to its essential structure by the season. No leaves, no softening, just the actual architecture of things without decoration. She heard Stellan push back his chair. She heard him cross the kitchen, and he stopped a few feet behind her, and they stood in the quiet kitchen with the winter light coming through the glass and said nothing, and the nothing between them was not empty. It is not over, she said. No, he agreed. Not yet. But it started. It started, he said, and we are still here. She looked at the landscape outside the window at the bare trees and the flat ground and the sky that went all the way to the horizon without interruption. She breathed in and out and felt the ache in her knee and the thin line on her lip and the deep fatigue that 9 hours of sleep had only begun to address. And she felt underneath all of it something that had no clean name. Not peace, not victory, not the particular relief of a thing finished because nothing was finished yet, and she understood that clearly. But she was standing in a kitchen in the winter light with her hands at her sides and her face turned toward the window, and nobody was telling her who to be. That was the beginning of something. She did not know yet what it was the beginning of. She suspected it would take a long time to find out, and that the finding out would not be clean or linear or free of cost, and that the man behind her would be part of it in ways she could not fully map yet, and that the work with the organization she had mentioned was real and would take years and would matter, and that Eli's name would exist in the world differently than it had before this week. None of those things were certain. All of them were possible. She turned from the window. Stellan looked at her from across the kitchen, and the expression on his face was one she had learned to read over 4 days that had been longer than most years, and what it said was simply that he was there, and that there was a difference between being there and being anywhere else, and that the difference mattered to him. Let's go, she said. He reached for his jacket. They walked out of the kitchen into the rest of whatever came next, and the winter light followed them through the door and fell across the floor behind them and stayed there long after they were gone. Outside, the flat landscape held its honest quiet under the November sky. And Voss Tower, 40 miles north, stood against the Chicago skyline with the name still lit on the north face, burning a little less brightly than it had the night before, and a little less than that the night after, and so on, until the name meant something different than it had or nothing at all, which was in the end the only kind of ending that was real.